The courtroom suddenly erupted into chaos and disbelief. Tension hung heavy in the air, every breath weighed down by the haunting moment. Cory Harrison, the 41-year-old son of Rick Harrison, star of the reality show Pawn Stars, sat at the defendant's table, his face cold and expressionless. But as the judge's gavel fell and the words, "life sentence without parole," rang out, a sudden shift in him changed everything. Before we go further, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping videos. The crowd held its breath as Cory Harrison's face twisted with emotion before he collapsed to the floor. His body crumpled in the cold courtroom, and an eerie silence enveloped the room. In that moment, time seemed to freeze, as if the air had been sucked out of the space. The jury, witnesses, and spectators stood speechless, unable to believe their eyes. The truth about the fate of Cory Harrison, once a symbol of a famous family, was now slowly coming to light. Kochuindentoi Kua. Cory Harrison. Cory Harrison's story began years ago in a glamorous world where fame and wealth masked a darker truth. Cory, the son of Rick Harrison, was a beloved figure on Pawn Stars. Known as a charming son, he was adored for his likability and humor on television. However, behind that facade lay a shocking reality. While the TV show Pawn Stars drew millions of viewers and the Harrison family's pawn shop thrived, a vast criminal empire, secretly run by Cory's father, was quietly growing. Built from a legitimate front, illegal activities like money laundering and human trafficking crumbled under the weight of an investigation. As Cory lay collapsed on the courtroom floor, it wasn't just his life that crumbled. It was the collapse of a dynasty, an empire the Harrison family had built. This shattering not only tarnished their name, but left an entire nation questioning. How could a family once seen as a symbol of the American dream fall into such a horrific tragedy? The case was not just the story of one man, but a reflection of the fragile line between fame and infamy. Cory Harrison's downfall in court officially marked the end of an empire. Cory Harrison's life has always been tied to the public eye. From a young age, he was an integral part of Pawn Stars, the show that followed his family's pawn shop business in Las Vegas. With millions of viewers, Cory was the charming son of Rick Harrison, the man behind a gold and silver pawn empire. On screen, he was the jokester, bantering with customers and creating a warm, likable atmosphere. But behind the scenes, when the cameras stopped rolling, a far different reality lurked. While viewers saw Cory as cheerful and friendly on television, the reality was that he had been involved in his family's criminal activities for years. Once the cameras turned off, Cory was no longer the jovial Harrison son, but an active participant in illegal dealings, helping to protect and expand the family's empire. These actions allowed his family to amass power and wealth, but ultimately led to the collapse of everything. The Harrison family's pawn shop, seemingly a legitimate business, was actually a front for criminal activities. Money laundering, trafficking, and other dark dealings went far beyond what was shown on television. As the investigation into the Harrison family began, it became clear that Cory Harrison was not just a passive bystander in his family's crimes. Cory played a key role in managing illegal transactions, collaborating with criminal networks, and ensuring the family's business kept thriving, all while the public continued to see the Harrisons as one of America's favorite TV families. The FBI raid on Rick Harrison's Las Vegas villa exposed the full scale of the criminal empire the family had built. With this revelation, Cory's involvement became undeniable. The Harrison family's empire, once rooted in a legitimate gold and silver pawn shop and the hit TV show Pawn Stars, had now emerged as an international crime organization. Cory, once the model son of a famous family, had become an integral part of these criminal activities. The Harrison family's story was once a symbol of American ingenuity and success. Rick Harrison built the gold and silver pawn shop into a thriving business, and Pawn Stars propelled the family to the heights of fame. However, as this empire grew, dark undercurrents began to surface. The FBI started investigating suspicions of money laundering and illegal transactions, and when former employees and associates began speaking out, red flags were raised. The investigation gradually uncovered a complex criminal network the Harrison family was involved in, with Cory, once the family's public face on television, now a key figure in this empire. The trial of Cory Harrison drew widespread attention from Pawn Stars fans, journalists, and investigators alike. As evidence was presented, Cory's deep involvement in his family's criminal activities became undeniable. Financial records, employee testimonies, and other evidence painted a clear picture of his role in managing illegal transactions and sustaining the growth of the Harrison criminal empire. The investigation and trial marked not only the end of a famous TV family, but also a testament to the collapse of an empire built on a foundation of crime. Cory Harrison's role in illegal transactions, money laundering, and working with criminal organizations was undeniable. The prosecution painted a clear picture of his involvement, portraying Cory as a willing accomplice who used his public image to conceal his family's criminal activities. Throughout the trial, the defense argued that Cory was coerced or manipulated by his father and other figures in the criminal network. However, the evidence clearly demonstrated that Cory actively participated in the illegal activities, doing far more than he initially admitted. As the trial neared its end, the tension in the courtroom grew palpable. Everyone knew the sentence would be severe, but no one could predict when that moment would arrive. When the judge pronounced a life sentence without parole for Cory, the weight of the verdict was too much for him to bear. Cory, who had maintained his composure through most of the trial, now crumbled under the pressure. His collapse in the courtroom was not just a physical reaction to the ruling, but a symbol of the destruction of everything he had ever known. A family empire built on years of deception and effort. The Harrison family's story is familiar to millions of Americans. Rick Harrison, the founder of the gold and silver pawn shop, started a small business in 1989 and turned it into an icon of ingenuity and perseverance. His Las Vegas pawn shop became a model of hard work and entrepreneurial creativity. However, when Pawn Stars debuted, everything changed. The reality show catapulted the Harrison family into the spotlight, helping them build an empire worth millions. Each day, viewers tuned in to watch the haggling and see the bizarre items brought into the shop. For many, it was a window into the world of antiques and bargain hunting. But ultimately, the rapid growth of the family business led to dark, clandestine activities, expanding far beyond what initially seemed like a simple pawn shop. Over the years that Pawn Stars aired, the Harrison family became a cultural phenomenon. Their pawn business was no longer confined to Las Vegas, but expanded its influence globally. Cory Harrison, initially just a shop manager, became a key figure in this empire. However, with the rapid growth of their business, the Harrison family's illegal activities became increasingly complex and harder to conceal. What began as a small pawn shop serving local customers had transformed into part of a massive, glamorous entertainment industry. But behind the glitz of Pawn Stars lay a dark reality that, now exposed, forced everyone to face the consequences. Cory Harrison gradually became more involved in both the show and the family business. His face became as recognizable as that of his father, Rick Harrison. Cory's role on Pawn Stars expanded as he became a regular, often delivering sarcastic quips and witty remarks, much like the father he admired. However, behind the scenes, the growing success of the gold and silver pawn shop began to conceal something far darker. As the Harrison family's wealth grew, so did the opportunities for criminal activities. Cory, like many young people raised in a family business, was drawn into the allure of success and the rewards that came with it. The idea of operating within the legal bounds of the pawn shop faded, replaced by the temptation of illicit profits. While Rick Harrison was the mastermind, founding and leading the shop, Cory became an essential part of managing the behind-the-scenes dealings, helping the business not only survive, but thrive. As Cory took on a more prominent role in the shop, managing daily operations and interacting directly with customers on screen, his influence in the business grew. Starting as a simple comedic figure on Pawn Stars, Cory evolved into a more complex character as he became aware of the darker side of the family's operations. Whispers circulated among employees, customers, and even other business owners about suspicious transactions at the pawn shop. Yet, for a long time, the Harrison family seemed untouchable, unquestioned, and unscathed by scrutiny over their dealings. Nevertheless, Cory's deepening involvement in the pawn business not only solidified his place in the family empire, but also forged close ties to the criminal underworld. When the FBI began its investigation, they discovered that the Harrison family's legitimate pawn operations were merely a front for a vast and sophisticated criminal network. Activities such as money laundering, smuggling, and human trafficking took place under the guise of routine pawn transactions. Initially, Cory was unaware of the full scope of these criminal activities, but as the truth gradually unraveled, it became clear and undeniable. Ultimately, Cory Harrison was drawn into the scheme in ways that not only changed his life, but also led to the collapse of the entire family empire. The FBI investigation began quietly with initial suspicions about financial irregularities. Small discrepancies were noticed in the pawn shop's financial reports. Unusual transactions were flagged, and authorities started piecing together the puzzle. At first, the investigation focused on the shop's books, but it quickly expanded as agents uncovered a far more dangerous picture. Cory Harrison, along with his father Rick Harrison and others in the family, was entangled in these criminal activities. As the investigation continued, it became clear that the Harrison family was running one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in the country. Yet, even as the investigation unfolded, the public remained unaware of the truth behind the Harrisons. To millions of fans, they were still the lovable trio from Pawn Stars, making sharp deals with quirky customers and bringing laughter to audiences. The family's reputation as one of Las Vegas's most successful businesses made it hard for most to believe anything sinister was happening behind the scenes. The rise of the Harrison family and the resounding success of Pawn Stars were built on a carefully curated image, a veneer of success, humor, and relatability. Their story was seen as a symbol of perseverance, hard work, and the American dream. However, as the business grew and the family's wealth increased, opportunities to cross ethical boundaries began to emerge. Fame made the Harrison family a household name in reality television, but it also made them a target for exposure. Cory Harrison, along with his father and grandfather, now faced the consequences of building their empire on lies and deception, with a criminal network carefully concealed beneath their public image. Cory spent years living in the shadow of his father's success, enjoying the privileges that came with the family business. But as the truth began to surface, the weight of his actions and his role in facilitating the family's illegal activities became overwhelming. The collapse of the Harrison empire was not just the end of a business venture, but the unraveling of a life built on lies. Cory had lived in the public eye for years, but now, with the FBI investigation, his personal life was scrutinized in ways he could never have imagined. As the FBI closed in on the Harrison family's operations, secrets long hidden began to surface. Cory's involvement in the family's criminal activities could no longer be denied. He and his family had built an empire not only on legitimate transactions, but also on illicit operations, and now the public was confronted with the painful truth. Clearly, the Harrison empire was doomed to collapse. The fame that had once shielded the family from their dark truth now turned against them. Cory Harrison's role in the family's criminal activities would soon be exposed to the world. The public's admiration for the Harrisons would quickly turn to disgust as the sinister secrets of their empire were brought to light. In the early days, everything seemed perfect for the Harrison family. They had built an empire from nothing. Their pawn shop became a Las Vegas icon, a place where tourists could experience the thrill of deals on everything from antique jewelry to rare collectibles. And of course, the success of Pawn Stars elevated the family's fame to new heights, making Rick Harrison and his son, Cory, household names. But behind the glamorous facade, things began to shift. The rapid rise in the Harrison family's wealth and fame wasn't without its challenges. While they basked in the spotlight, signs of trouble began to emerge. The pawn business, once a simple shop, had grown more complex, entangled in murky transaction networks and questionable financial dealings. It started small, almost imperceptible. Initially, only a few customers noticed irregularities in the shop's transactions. Items disappeared without explanation, and deals seemed too good to be true. Then, employees began whispering among themselves. Some raised concerns about a sudden influx of strange, untraceable, or inexplicable items, while others noticed odd financial transactions that didn't add up. The pawn shop, once a place for customers seeking quick cash, had now become a hub for individuals with ties to the criminal underworld. Rick Harrison, the head of the business, was no stranger to tough deals, but even he sensed things were shifting. Cory Harrison, his son and right-hand man, became increasingly involved in daily operations, particularly in behind-the-scenes transactions that weren't always transparent. As the business grew, the temptation to expand beyond the legal boundaries of the pawn shop's operations intensified. At the same time, whispers emerged about something more troubling: a criminal network operating within the pawn shop's world. It was no longer just about trading rare antiques. Some began to speculate that the Harrison family was involved in illegal transactions like money laundering, drug trafficking, and other clandestine activities. However, no one dared to voice these concerns publicly, especially given the family's carefully crafted public image. Over the next few months, the rumors grew louder. Several former employees spoke out, some anonymously, while others gave interviews to the press. They described secretive transactions involving people arriving at the shop with bags full of cash and leaving with items of questionable value. They also mentioned strange meetings held behind closed doors, far from the prying eyes of cameras. Yet despite all the rumors and allegations, nothing concrete emerged. On the surface, the Harrison family's business appeared as legitimate as ever, and Pawn Stars continued to dominate TV ratings. This individual, who worked at the pawn shop for years, began questioning certain items brought in. These weren't the usual jewelry or antiques one might expect at a pawn shop. They were high-end pieces, rare paintings, expensive jewelry, and historical artifacts that seemed to come out of nowhere. The employee, suspicious of the item's origins, started digging deeper. It wasn't long before they uncovered irregularities in the records. Some items had been pawned for far less than their true value, while others appeared to have been sold without proper documentation. When employees confronted Rick Harrison about these issues, they were met with a cold reception. Rick assured them that everything was fine and that the business was simply growing, claiming there would always be some irregularities in such a large operation. However, the employees didn't believe him. They began to feel that something darker was going on. Shortly after, one of the employees was fired under suspicious circumstances. This firing raised even more red flags within the store. It wasn't just one or two disgruntled workers making accusations. Whispers spread and people began to talk. At this point, the FBI began taking an interest in the Harrison family's pawn shop. The initial investigation moved slowly and methodically, but it soon became clear that the issues within the Harrison operation were more serious than anyone had imagined. The FBI started scrutinizing financial records and tracking the flow of money through the shop. What they discovered was alarming. A large sum of money had been funneled through the business with no clear explanation of its origin or destination. They uncovered transactions that were inconsistent with the pawn shop's normal operations, including unexplained payments to suppliers and large withdrawals from the business accounts with no justification. As the investigation expanded, the FBI's suspicions began to focus on Cory Harrison. While Rick Harrison was undoubtedly the face of the business, Cory had taken on more behind-the-scenes responsibilities. Cory had started overseeing the pawn shop's operations in a way that went far beyond what's typically expected of a business owner. The FBI uncovered records linking Cory to a network of criminal associates, individuals tied to organized crime and money laundering. The deeper the FBI dug into the Harrison family's activities, the more troubling details began to emerge. The pawn shop, once a symbol of American entrepreneurial spirit, has now become the center of a sweeping investigation that threatens to bring down the entire Harrison family empire. Cory Harrison, who had lived a life of luxury and fame, now faces the consequences of becoming involved in something far more dangerous than he ever imagined. As the investigation unfolds, the pressure on Cory and the Harrison family continues to mount. They spent years building an empire and crafting a public image synonymous with success and prosperity. But behind the scenes, their world is beginning to fall apart. The public image the Harrison family worked so hard to build is now on the verge of collapsing. For Cory, the stakes have never been higher. His life, once filled with privilege and opportunity, is now teetering on the edge of disaster. The FBI's ever-expanding investigation is becoming a public spectacle, and it's only a matter of time before everything comes to light. The rise of the Harrison family empire, once a symbol of American success, is now heading toward a dramatic downfall. The courtroom is packed. Spectators, journalists, and media outlets have all gathered to witness the trial of the decade, one that has sent shockwaves through the world of entertainment. Cory Harrison, the beloved son of Pawn Stars patriarch Rick Harrison, now finds himself at the center of a criminal case that threatens to erase his family's legacy. The courtroom buzzes with a mix of excitement and skepticism as the man who once charmed millions on television now faces a far harsher reality. This trial isn't just a spectacle because of the fame of those involved, but because of the staggering seriousness of the charges at hand. Cory is facing life in prison without the possibility of parole for his role in the Harrison family's extensive criminal operations. The FBI's investigation uncovered a web of illegal activities, including money laundering, trafficking, and organized crime, all allegedly orchestrated under the guise of the Harrison family's pawn shop business. Cory's direct involvement in managing these illicit operations is undeniable, and the prosecution is prepared to lay out a mountain of evidence. As the trial begins, the atmosphere in the courtroom is thick with tension. The defense team, led by a seasoned criminal attorney, wasted no time in shaping their case around the idea that Cory Harrison was a manipulated son, drawn into a criminal world orchestrated by his father. They painted Cory as someone caught in something far bigger than he could ever fully comprehend. A pawn in Rick Harrison's dangerous game. The defense argued that Cory was merely following in the footsteps of his father, the true mastermind behind the operation. However, the prosecution came armed with damning evidence, ready to dismantle that narrative and present a case that left little room for doubt. The prosecution presented evidence showing Cory's active involvement in the criminal network, his role in arranging illegal transactions, and his direct connections to organized crime groups. There were emails, financial records, and encrypted documents linking Cory to a money laundering scheme. And perhaps the most damning of all were testimonies from former associates describing how Cory willingly participated in human trafficking, helping to move individuals in and out of the country under false pretenses. The case against Cory Harrison wasn't just about illegal deals and financial records. It was about the human toll his actions had inflicted. Victims of the trafficking ring, many of them vulnerable individuals lured into a cycle of exploitation, had become an integral part of the trial. Their stories were told with heartbreaking detail, casting a heavy silence over the courtroom as the full scale of the operation was laid bare. These were not just names on paper. They were real people whose lives had been shattered in the Harrison family's pursuit of wealth and power. The emotional weight of their suffering exposed the dark reality hidden beneath the polished image of a once-beloved public figure. Throughout the trial, Cory sat motionless in the defendant's chair, his face a mix of disbelief and sorrow. The courtroom was filled with the sounds of the prosecution's arguments, but Cory's mind wasn't focused on the proceedings. He had spent the past few months trying to come to terms with what had happened, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the damage was irreparable. His family's empire, once the pride of Las Vegas and the television world, was now destroyed. The man who had once been the charming, smiling son on Pawn Stars was now the defendant in a high-profile criminal trial, with his future hanging in the balance. The prosecution wasted no time presenting the full extent of the criminal activities Harrison had been involved in. They began with money laundering, offering a detailed account of how the pawn shop had been used as a vehicle to transfer money through a network of shell companies and criminal entities. The prosecution also emphasized Cory's role in managing these transactions, showing how he had been involved in approving deals clearly designed to launder money from illicit sources. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence was a series of financial records directly linking Cory to offshore accounts used to transfer profits from the pawn shop's illegal transactions. The prosecution presented testimony from financial experts who explained how these accounts were structured to conceal the true nature of the transactions. These were complex international dealings involving the transfer of large sums of money across borders while masking the origin of the funds. The prosecution also brought in expert witnesses to explain the methods the Harrison family used to operate the human trafficking ring. They described how vulnerable individuals were lured to Las Vegas with false promises, only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of exploitation. Victims who had been part of this operation were called to testify, sharing their heartbreaking stories. Their testimonies painted a grim picture of a network preying on society's most marginalized, revealing the extent of the abuse and manipulation involved. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but Cory, for the first time in weeks, showed no emotion. His fate had been sealed. There was no turning back. As the judges moved toward him, ready to escort him out of the courtroom, Cory collapsed into his chair, his body overwhelmed by emotion. The weight of the verdict was too much for him to bear. His empire, his family, and his legacy were gone. The public had always seen the gold and silver pawn shop as a thriving business, a place of treasure deals, where history was passed down from one generation to the next. But now, it was just a symbol of loss and devastation. Outside the shop stood a testament to the grandeur of Las Vegas, glowing with neon lights. The display windows showcased bizarre and rare items that could capture the attention of any collector. For fans of Pawn Stars, this was a place full of drama and excitement where history unfolded in real time with each item brought in. Cory Harrison, along with his father Rick and grandfather Old Man, had built a reputation for understanding the value of everything, both the tangible items on the counter and the relationships they cultivated with the customers who walked through their doors. But as the FBI's investigation revealed the hidden truths behind the pawn shop's glitzy facade, everything changed. What had been sold to the public as a legitimate family business, where people could make deals and haggle over heirlooms, was actually a sophisticated criminal enterprise. What was once a beloved spot on the Las Vegas Strip had now become the center of a trafficking ring, money laundering, and organized crime, right under everyone's nose. Cory Harrison, with all his charm and wit on television, now played a pivotal role in this dark underworld. The discovery of this double life didn't happen overnight. For many years, the family had worked to maintain the illusion that they were a legitimate business. As the fame of the pawn shop grew with Pawn Stars, the sophistication of their dealings escalated as well. What had started as seemingly harmless small transactions gradually morphed into something far more sinister. The money and goods flowing through the gold and silver pawn shop were no longer simply the result of a business selling antiques and collectibles. Now, the shop was part of a global criminal network, and Cory Harrison was at the heart of all the hidden activities. To the public, Cory's life appeared to be that of a typical entrepreneur, making deals, haggling over prices, and showcasing items with fascinating backstories of their own. But the truth behind the scenes was a dark tale of a family that built its empire on deception and criminal activities. What seemed like a legitimate business was, in reality, a front for a far more sinister operation, and Cory was deeply embedded in it all. However, behind the scenes, operations at the gold and silver pawn shop were becoming much more complicated. The transactions weren't just about buying and selling antiques. They involved money laundering, concealing the origins of illicit profits, and moving money across borders. Cory, who had initially been involved in managing the shop's daily operations, became increasingly involved in overseeing these illegal transactions. The FBI uncovered an extensive network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and hidden financial records that allowed the Harrison family to funnel money from their criminal activities into legitimate channels. Cory was responsible for overseeing much of this operation. He wasn't just running the counter. He was coordinating the flow of money, facilitating secret transactions, and liaising with those bringing in illicit goods to the pawn shop. For years, the pawn shop served as a front for these activities. Criminals, disguised as legitimate customers, would bring in valuable items, antiques, jewelry, or even rare works of art. Instead of receiving a fair price for these items, they were pawned for only a fraction of their true value, with the remaining money funneled into offshore accounts controlled by the Harrison family. The FBI's investigation revealed that these accounts were used to conceal large sums of money earned through illegal activities such as drug trafficking, extortion, and smuggling. But it wasn't just the financial aspect of the operation that raised alarms. The items themselves were often not what they seemed. Rare antiques, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, were being traded for much less. The discrepancy wasn't just about negotiating prices. It was about hiding the true value of the items being sold. When these goods were later sold through secondary channels, the family was able to make enormous profits while still concealing their true origins. This was the heart of the money laundering operation. Furthermore, the FBI later discovered that some of the items brought into the shop had been stolen or trafficked across state lines. The pawn shop had become a safe haven for items whose original owners could not be traced. It wasn't just a pawn shop. It was the center of a thriving criminal enterprise, using the legitimacy of the business to conceal the illegal transactions taking place beneath the surface. Now Cory Harrison managed the financial transactions that allowed the family to sustain their empire. His role in the money laundering operation was both active and essential. Cory coordinated the illegal money transfers into legitimate business channels. When customers, often criminals, came to the pawn shop to exchange stolen or illicitly obtained items, Cory would negotiate deals to ensure the least amount of money was exchanged. The disparity between the true value of the items and the price paid was then funneled into shell accounts to launder the money and conceal its criminal origins. The FBI's investigation revealed that Cory was not only aware of the operations happening behind the scenes, but was also actively involved in them. There was no doubt that he played an indispensable role in running the illegal activities. Records showed that he personally signed off on several transactions involving massive amounts of laundered money. He even communicated with known criminals to arrange for illicit goods to be brought into the pawn shop. While much of the focus of the investigation centered on the financial and logistical aspects of the operation, there was also a darker side to the story: the human cost. The human trafficking ring that the Harrison family was involved in had a wide reach, and its victims were individuals exploited by criminal networks. These people were brought to Las Vegas under false promises, often of jobs or opportunities, only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of exploitation. Many victims were forced to pawn their own belongings to survive. They were caught in a system that made them dependent on the pawn shop and unable to escape the clutches of the criminals controlling their lives. The FBI discovered that Cory Harrison played a direct role in managing the movement of these individuals, ensuring they remained off the radar and hidden from law enforcement. These victims were often treated as pawns in a much larger game, and Cory's involvement in exploiting them became increasingly apparent. The operation started to unravel as the investigation progressed, and the net around the Harrison family grew tighter. The pawn shop, once considered a legitimate business, was now under intense scrutiny by law enforcement. The FBI was uncovering more evidence of the family's criminal activities with each passing day. Cory's role in the operation was undeniable, and the evidence against him continued to mount. The reckoning came when the FBI raided the Harrison family's mansion in Las Vegas. Agents seized computers, documents, and financial records that would ultimately link Cory to the full scope of the operation. The raid marked a turning point in the investigation. It was now clear that the family's empire had been built on lies, deceit, and illegal activity, with Cory Harrison at the center of it all. As the operations of the pawn shop began to unravel, Cory found himself facing a future far removed from what he had imagined. The business that once made him a star on Pawn Stars was now the very thing that would bring about his downfall. The evidence of his involvement in the family's criminal activities was undeniable. For Cory, there was no escaping the truth. The world had been watching the Harrison family for years. From their humble beginnings in Las Vegas to their rise to fame through Pawn Stars, they had become symbols of the American dream, a family that built a successful business from the ground up. The public had embraced them, laughed with them, and admired their hard work. But now, the truth had been exposed, and the consequences of their criminal activities had been uncovered, sending shockwaves across the globe. The day the FBI revealed their findings, everything changed. The family, once seen as lovable characters on a popular TV show, was now linked to organized crime, money laundering, human trafficking, and a network of illegal transactions spanning across continents. Cory Harrison, once the witty and charming son on Pawn Stars, now faced a life sentence for his role in these activities. The public had to come to terms with the fact that the Harrison family was no longer the family they once admired on television. They were criminals, and their empire had been built on lies. The initial shockwaves hit hard, leaving the nation in disbelief. The Harrisons, who had been in the public eye for so long, had always been known for their charming personalities. Rick Harrison, with his witty humor and no-nonsense approach to business, had built a pawn shop empire that captured the hearts of millions. His son Cory, the affable sidekick, always ready with a quick joke or a sharp comment, was the one fans had come to know and love. The show had become a cultural phenomenon, and its success made the name Harrison a household one. They were seen as hard-working entrepreneurs, savvy businessmen who had built their fortune based on their expertise in antiques and collectibles. But everything changed the moment the FBI began investigating their operations. As details about their involvement in organized crime and human trafficking emerged, the public could no longer reconcile the family they admired with the dark criminal network that had been operating behind the scenes. The revelation that Cory Harrison, the once charming star of Pawn Stars, was involved in money laundering and human trafficking under the guise of running a pawn shop sent shockwaves across the nation. The initial reaction was one of disbelief. Fans who had followed Pawn Stars for years felt betrayed, struggling to comprehend how a family they had watched on TV for so long could be capable of such heinous crimes. The Harrisons had carefully crafted a public image that made it nearly impossible for many to understand that their empire was built on such a dark foundation. If you're as shocked by these revelations as we are and want to dive deeper into the hidden secrets behind the Harrison family, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. This story serves as a stark reminder of what lurks behind the glitz and glamour of show business. The shockwaves spread across social media and late-night talk shows. Memes and jokes spread like wildfire. But beneath the humor was a deep sense of betrayal. People didn't just feel that the Harrison family had broken the law. They felt they had been deceived about it and had been complicit in supporting a criminal family. For the first time in years, Pawn Stars was no longer the wholesome family show it once was. What had been an icon of America had now become a cautionary tale about corruption and deception. The public image of the Harrisons had been so tarnished that it seemed beyond repair. The damage wasn't just limited to their reputation, it also affected their business, their family, and the empire they had painstakingly built. The public's furious reaction to the end of Pawn Stars grew even stronger as the scandal surrounding the Harrison family continued to unfold. Longtime fans of Pawn Stars felt disillusioned, struggling to reconcile the charming television personalities they once admired with the reality of their criminal actions. The show, which had been a cornerstone of reality television for over a decade, was now in jeopardy. Television networks and producers quickly tried to distance themselves from the Harrison family as they realized that continuing to air Pawn Stars could risk associating their network with the scandal. While the show had already been affected in recent years, it now seemed like a burden. Viewer ratings plummeted as fans shifted their attention elsewhere. There was no longer any interest in watching a family that had become synonymous with criminal behavior. The fallout wasn't just limited to the Pawn Stars themselves, it extended to the other business ventures of the Harrisons as well. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a thriving business attracting tourists from all over the world, now faced protests and calls for boycotts. What was once a must-visit stop for tourists in Las Vegas was now under scrutiny, as people began to question whether they had unknowingly supported a criminal operation. The local community in Las Vegas, which had once regarded the Harrison family as a symbol of success, now looked down on them. Businesses that had previously partnered with the Harrisons quickly pulled away and distanced themselves from the scandal. The relentless media coverage and wild speculation about the downfall of the Harrison family showed no signs of slowing down. The media coverage of the downfall of the Harrison family was relentless. Every new detail uncovered by the FBI was met with intense scrutiny, and the press quickly sensationalized the story. The investigation revealed shocking truths about the Harrison family's criminal empire, including money laundering, human trafficking, and organized crime. But there were always more questions than answers. Journalists and reporters dug deep into every corner of the family's life, seeking new angles and twists in the story. The relentless pursuit of new information kept the public captivated, even as the fallout continued to grow. Reporters speculated about how the Harrison family's success had led them down the path of corruption. They wondered how Cory, once seen as a smart young man with a bright future in business, could become involved in something so dark. Was it greed, power, or a desperate desire to preserve the family's legacy at any cost? For the Harrisons, media scrutiny was unrelenting. Interviews with former employees, anonymous sources, and legal experts painted a picture of a family overwhelmed by their own success. Their rise to fame had been swift, but it appeared that the very success they built had ultimately become their undoing, as the lure of wealth and power led them to compromise their integrity and fall into criminal activity. Cory Harrison's trial became a media event in itself. With each day of testimony, new revelations surfaced, and the public's reaction became increasingly hostile as details of his involvement in criminal enterprises were exposed. Cory's personal struggles, a broken family, were now a public spectacle. For Cory Harrison, the consequences of the investigation and trial were not just public, they were deeply personal. A family that had once been united was now fractured, with relationships strained and trust shattered. Cory's father, Rick Harrison, who had always been the face of the family business, now found himself engulfed in a cloud of suspicion. The empire they had built together, once admired and celebrated, was crumbling under the weight of betrayal and scandal. Although Rick was not charged with any crimes, the damage to his reputation was undeniable. The Harrison family's legacy was being destroyed, and no one was exempt from the fallout. As for Cory, he had always lived in the shadow of his father's success. As a young man, he had gained public attention when he appeared on television as the son of the famous Rick Harrison. He enjoyed the perks of fame, wealth, and the admiration of millions of fans. But now, after being convicted, Cory was forced to face the harsh reality of his actions. The media portrayed him as a villain, and the public's perception of him had soured. The future that once seemed bright and full of promise on the Pawn Stars set had now shattered. Inside the courtroom, as he faced his sentence, Cory had a moment of clarity. He had become part of something much bigger than himself, something that had overwhelmed him in ways he hadn't fully realized until it was too late. No longer was he the charming TV personality who had brightened millions of homes. Now, he was a convicted criminal, forced to face the lifelong consequences of his actions. Cory Harrison's sentence brought a sense of closure to the case, but the fallout from the scandal was far from over. His life sentence without the possibility of parole served as a harsh reminder of the consequences of his actions. The Harrison family's legacy was tarnished, their empire collapsed, and the future seemed uncertain. For the public, the end of Pawn Stars was just the beginning of a larger conversation about the dangers of fame and the fragile line between success and corruption. The Harrison family stands as living proof that even the most carefully crafted public image can be shattered by the truth. As the investigation into their criminal activities continued, no one knew what other secrets would be uncovered, and there was no guarantee that those who had once been admired by millions would ever find redemption. When the court delivered its verdict and the courtroom fell silent, Cory Harrison's life changed irreversibly. The weight of his life sentence without the possibility of parole struck him with the force of a freight train, forever altering his path. The days of flashy cars, lavish vacations, and the admiration of the public that he received as a star on Pawn Stars were now over. The dreams of continuing the Harrison family empire, following in the footsteps of his father, Rick Harrison, were gone. Instead, Cory's future was now confined to the cold, sterile walls of a prison cell, far removed from the world of fame and wealth he once knew. As the judges escorted him out of the courtroom, he felt the weight of the irreversible change that had altered his life forever. The once lively, charming image of Cory Harrison seemed to deflate. His posture slumped, and the face that was once full of sarcastic wit and charm now lacked any expression. The man who used to mock the insults of customers and joke with his father and grandfather on television was now a man facing the full force of the law. In that moment, Cory was no longer the witty, likable pawn shop manager the world had watched on Pawn Stars. He was a convicted criminal who would face a future behind bars. Cory Harrison had always been accustomed to the bright lights of television. For years, he lived a lavish life, surrounded by the glitz and glamour of Las Vegas and the fame of a reality TV star. Pawn Stars had been a massive success, and as one of its stars, Cory lived comfortably, enjoying the perks that came with his role in the family business. He was admired by fans for his wit and humor, and respected within the pawn industry for his expertise. But all of that changed the day he was convicted. Cory's world was turned upside down. No longer the son of a beloved TV star, he was now a criminal, branded by the media and the public for his involvement in a vast and illegal criminal enterprise. The life sentence awaiting him is a stark contrast to the world he once knew. He would no longer be the center of attention, telling jokes and making deals. Instead, he would live in a concrete cell, separated from the life he once took for granted. Prison life was a far cry from the luxury Cory had once enjoyed. The transition from the glamorous reality TV world to the harsh reality of prison was nothing short of brutal. Cory's first days behind bars were filled with confusion, fear, and a deep sense of isolation. His entire identity had been built around his public image, and now that image no longer mattered. No one in prison cared that he had once been a part of Pawn Stars. No one knew or cared about the family business that had turned him into a star. To the other inmates, Cory was just another prisoner, someone who had committed a crime and was now paying the price. In the early days of his incarceration, Cory struggled to come to terms with the harsh realities of life behind bars. He had never been accustomed to the physical and mental challenges that came with living in prison. The overcrowded cells, the constant noise, the tension in the air, everything was overwhelming. Cory had been used to controlling every decision and having the world at his feet, but in prison, that sense of control evaporated. He was now subject to the prison system, dictated by other inmates, and bound by the strict rules that governed life behind bars. For the first time in his life, Cory had to learn the meaning of humility. He was forced to confront the consequences of his actions and live in a world where his name and fame meant nothing. During his first few months in prison, Cory began to fully grasp the profound changes in his life and the price he had to pay for the poor choices he had made in the past. Cory went through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, regret, loneliness, and fear. He longed for the life he once knew, the familiarity of his family and the business he had helped build. But above all, he missed the sense of purpose he once had. Now, in the cold silence of his cell, that purpose seemed lost. The emotional struggles and psychological weight of prison life were an immense challenge for Cory. Life felt overwhelming to him. For someone who had spent most of his life in the public eye, the sudden isolation was something almost unbearable to endure. He had always been surrounded by people, family, colleagues, fans, and now he was alone, cut off from the world that once revolved around him. The loneliness of prison was suffocating, and the realization that he had squandered his opportunities weighed heavily on his mind. A wave of guilt flooded Cory. He had once been a star, a person with everything to lose, yet he had thrown it all away. Days turned into weeks, then months, and Cory began to reflect on his life. He thought about his father, Rick Harrison, and the business they had built together. He thought about the show that made him famous and how fame had blinded him to the darker aspects of life. He had always considered himself a successful entrepreneur. But now, sitting in his cell, he realized he understood very little about the consequences of his actions. Cory had betrayed the trust of the public, his fans, and his family. His role in the criminal activities was significant, and the weight of that guilt was almost unbearable. Though he tried to push it away, the truth kept coming back to him. He had willingly become a part of a criminal network, a network that caused pain and suffering for many. Human trafficking, money laundering. Cory was at the center of it all. And now he had to live with the consequences. But there was still one more thing Cory had to confront: his relationship with his family. He had always seen himself as a loyal son, working alongside his father to build a successful business. But now, that loyalty was in question. Rick Harrison, the man who had taught him everything he knew about business, was now a stranger to him, left behind by Cory's actions. The consequences of Cory's conviction had strained their relationship. And even though Rick hadn't been charged with any crimes, the damage to the family legacy was undeniable. Cory wondered if he would ever be able to repair his relationship with his father, or if it had been permanently broken. In the months following his conviction, Cory began to reflect on his life and the choices he had made. Unable to escape the reality of his circumstances, he realized he was in prison for the rest of his life, with no chance of returning to the world he once knew. His days were now filled with monotony and boredom, and the excitement of the life he once lived seemed like a distant memory. But in the solitude of his cell, Cory found moments of clarity. He realized he had lived in a world of illusion, blinded by fame and the allure of success. The empire that once seemed invincible had been built on a fragile foundation, and now it was gone. The lessons Cory had learned about business, trust, and family were ones he could no longer ignore. He had built his life on the idea that success was the ultimate goal. But now, he understood that success without integrity, without ethics, was hollow. He had learned this lesson the hard way, but as Cory reflected on his life, there were moments of hope. He began to see that even in the darkest times, there was an opportunity for redemption. Prison had given him the time and space to think, to reflect on his past actions, and to consider the future. He knew that he could never undo the harm he had caused, but perhaps he could find a way to make amends, to contribute in a way that might bring a little peace to his life. Cory Harrison's future behind bars was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: he would never be the man he once was, the man who had walked out of the courtroom arrogant, confident in his ability to overcome his past. The man who was once a reality TV star was now a convicted criminal, living a life with consequences. But in the silence of his cell, Cory began to think that perhaps, in the long run, the hardest lessons were often the ones that changed a person the most. Cory's time in prison had only just begun, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. But as the days passed and the reality of his sentence sank in, he began to accept the truth. He had lost everything he once cherished. And now all that remained was the opportunity to rebuild, starting from within. The investigation into the Harrison family's criminal empire was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun to reveal the full scope of a vast and complex network of illegal activities, not only spanning across Las Vegas, but also reaching international borders. As Cory accepted his life sentence in prison, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies continued to piece together the remaining elements of the organized crime ring that had been operated through the gold and silver pawn shop. The revelations were staggering. What had once seemed like a local money laundering operation and illegal currency dealings quickly expanded into a diverse, international criminal enterprise. The Harrison family had created a complex network of shell companies, foreign accounts, and illegal transactions that spanned across continents. The pawn shop, once seen as a symbol of American ingenuity and entrepreneurship, was merely a front for these darker activities. As more evidence came to light, the scale of their human trafficking operations was exposed. The FBI uncovered details linking the Harrison pawn shop to a larger network of human trafficking and illegal trade. The victims, many of whom had been lured to Las Vegas with false promises, found themselves trapped in a system where they were forced to pay off debts, pawn their belongings, and become part of a far more sinister enterprise. What shocked the public even more was the involvement of several high-ranking individuals in the criminal network. The investigation began to uncover a series of connections between the Harrison family and organized crime groups operating both in the U.S. and abroad. There were ties to drug cartels, arms dealers, and even individuals connected to international human trafficking rings. These were the kinds of connections that most people could hardly believe. However, the evidence was undeniable. The discovery of more victims as the FBI delved deeper into the human trafficking aspect of the investigation revealed the extent of exploitation under the Harrison family's control. Many of the victims, who had come to Las Vegas with hopes of a better life, were now trapped in a cycle of brutal abuse. They were promised jobs, an opportunity to build a future, only to find themselves ensnared in debt with the Harrison family pawn shop. They were forced to give up their personal belongings and, in some cases, were coerced into working off their debts under the threat of violence or deportation. The FBI discovered that Cory Harrison played a direct role in managing the flow of people through Las Vegas. He worked with human traffickers, part of a larger organization, to move people in and out of the city, ensuring they went undetected by law enforcement. Cory played a crucial role in organizing the transactions carried out at the gold and silver pawn shop, making sure the victims' dealings were kept secret and that authorities were unaware of the full scale of the operation. One of the most heartbreaking discoveries came when the FBI uncovered a series of documents, including names, photos, and detailed accounts from the victims who had been trapped in this criminal system. Many of these individuals were never seen again after being sold into forced labor or sex trafficking rings. The revelation of these victims painted a grim picture of what had been happening right under the nose of the Harrison family for years. As the investigation progressed, more and more victims began to speak out. Some had escaped the network, while others were rescued by law enforcement. Their stories were horrifying, and their courage in coming forward provided the FBI with even more evidence, which would ultimately be used to dismantle the criminal empire that had been operating through the pawn shop. The search for accomplices and the ripple effect on the Harrison family continued. Although Cory Harrison had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, the investigation was far from over. Authorities knew there were still other individuals within the Harrison family's network who had yet to be brought to justice. Cory was not the only one involved in the criminal activities, and it was only a matter of time before the full extent of the Harrison family's empire was revealed. The search for accomplices intensified as the FBI followed leads pointing to other individuals who had been complicit in the criminal activities of the Harrison family. Rumors circulated that some former employees of Gold and Silver Pawn Shop had been involved in illegal activities, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Several former employees were brought in for questioning, and some were granted immunity in exchange for their testimonies. it became clear that more people were involved in this scheme than just Cory. Rick Harrison, the head of the family, was largely unaffected by the investigation, as he was not directly charged with any offenses. However, as more information surfaced, authorities began to take a closer look at his role in the operation. Could Rick Harrison simply be an innocent bystander, unaware of the criminal activities unfolding within his family? Or did he also play a part in the illegal dealings that fueled the family's fame and wealth? As the investigation continued, Rick's name began to surface in connection with various aspects of the operation. Financial records indicated that he was aware of the suspicious transactions taking place at the pawn shop. There were even signs suggesting that Rick had been involved in facilitating money laundering through his business and was aware of human trafficking activities. While Rick had not been charged at the time Cory was sentenced, the investigation is now focused on whether he intentionally became a part of the criminal empire. The ongoing revelations from the investigation sparked an even bigger media frenzy. The story of Cory Harrison's conviction was already major news, but as the investigation into his family's empire expanded, the story became even more scandalous. The media is now reporting on the wider impact of the Harrison family's criminal activities, and the story dominated headlines for weeks. What was once a beloved reality TV family is now a symbol of corruption and criminal conduct. Public trust in the Harrison family, once strong, has been shattered. Fans who once admired the family for their business success now feel betrayed. The FBI's investigation painted a picture of a family that used their public image as a shield to conceal illegal dealings, and the public was outraged. In Las Vegas, where the Harrison family was once seen as locals and celebrities, the mood has shifted. The pawn shop is no longer a popular tourist destination, and the city has distanced itself from the once celebrated legacy of the family. The locals who once admired Rick Harrison and his family for their success now view them as criminals. There have even been calls to permanently shut down the pawn shop. For Cory, the media continues to report on his life sentence and the ongoing investigation into his family's empire. His story is no longer just about a man who made mistakes, but a testament to the corruption of a family once admired. The consequences of their actions and betrayal have not only affected Cory, but have also brought down an empire that was once a symbol of success in the pawn industry. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of greed, fame, and the relentless pursuit of power at any cost. Public perception of Cory has changed forever. Once seen as a charming TV personality, he is now a convicted criminal, a symbol of how the pursuit of wealth and success can corrupt even the most familiar faces. The search for justice continues. While the media frenzy rages on, the FBI remains focused on dismantling the remaining parts of the criminal empire built through the pawn shops dealing in gold and silver. There are still many questions to be answered, and numerous individuals have yet to be brought to trial. The investigation has led to the dismantling of a major human trafficking ring, but authorities are determined to uncover the full scope of the operation. They know that for the Harrison family's criminal network, only the surface has been scratched. The story of Cory Harrison and his family is far from over. As the FBI continues to uncover new details and follow leads, it's clear that much more remains to be discovered. The impact of the investigation into the Harrison family is devastating. But for the victims who were exploited, there is still hope that justice will eventually be served. The story of the Harrison family has always been one of ambition, fame, and the American dream. From their humble beginnings in Las Vegas to their rapid rise on Pawn Stars, they became symbols of success. Rick Harrison, with his sharp intelligence and business acumen, built a pawn shop that became a household name. His son, Cory Harrison, grew up in the spotlight, becoming the charming star of the show alongside his father and grandfather. Together, they built an empire not just in the pawn industry, but also in the world of reality television. The public's affection for the Harrison family was undeniable. They were the all-American family, hard-working, witty, and approachable. Fans tuned in week after week to watch them haggle over prices and share their unique sense of humor. For many, Pawn Stars was more than just a TV show. It was a glimpse into the daily lives of a family that had made it big. And for Cory, it was a platform that allowed him to step out of his father's shadow and into the spotlight on his own. His wit, quick thinking, and charm made him a fan favorite. But beneath the surface of this public persona, another reality was unfolding. A reality that would change everything. As the FBI's investigation began, cracks in the carefully constructed public image of the Harrison family started to show. The same public that once admired Cory and his family now found themselves questioning everything they had seen on Pawn Stars. How could a family that appeared so down-to-earth and approachable be involved in such a vast and complex criminal operation? The world the Harrison family had built, the empire they had created, now seemed like a house of cards ready to collapse at any moment. As the investigation continued, the media frenzy grew ever more intense. Each new revelation seemed to make the story even more sensational. The Harrison family, once seen as the epitome of the American dream, was now exposed as a family living in lies. The truth was even more frightening than anyone could have imagined. The pawn shop, once the heart of their business, was revealed to be a front for money laundering, human trafficking, and other illegal activities. Cory Harrison, once a symbol of success, had now become the focal point of a scandal that threatened to destroy everything his family had worked so hard to build. Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Fans who had once admired Cory for his charm now felt betrayed. The audience of Pawn Stars, who had watched Cory grow up on TV, now found themselves grappling with a harsh reality. How could the man they had watched for years, laughing and joking while making deals and building a business, be involved in such dark and illegal activities? It's a question that's hard to answer for many, and for some it's simply too much to bear. The trust they had placed in the Harrison family has been shattered. The illusion of the Harrison family's fame and reputation, built on the image of a successful, hard-working family, has been completely destroyed. The pawn shop stars, who built the family's reputation and the success of the show, allowed them to live a life most people can only dream of. But behind the glamorous facade of fame, the reality was far different. The pawn shop, once a symbol of hard work and the American entrepreneurial spirit, had become a front for illegal activities. And at the center of it all was Cory Harrison, who became deeply involved in these operations. The fall from grace was swift. One moment, Cory was the charming and witty star of a beloved reality show, and the next, he was the focus of a criminal investigation that uncovered the darkest corners of his family's business. The public, once celebrating his success, now turned their backs on him, shocked by the revelations that had come to light. What once seemed like a blessing in terms of reputation had now become a curse. It had given the Harrisons a platform to build their empire, but it also made them targets. The admiration from the public quickly turned to contempt as the truth about their criminal empire was exposed. For Cory, the price of fame was steep. He had been thrust into the public eye at a young age, and for many years he had enjoyed the privileges that came with being a television star. But fame comes at a cost. As the investigation revealed more about the Harrison family's illegal activities, Cory found himself at the center of a scandal that threatened to destroy everything he had worked for. The public's affection for him quickly turned to anger, and fans who had once admired and cheered him now felt betrayed. The reputation that had given Cory everything he ever wanted, money, fame, and all the privileges that came with it, had now become a heavy burden, difficult to bear. The success and foundation for building the family legacy had now become the very thing that led to his downfall. The public image he had worked so hard to cultivate shattered, and Cory was forced to face the harsh reality of his actions. His reputation, once built on the family's success, was now destroyed. The pressure to live under the spotlight, for many, is a dream come true. Fame brings opportunities, wealth, and a level of influence that most people could never imagine. But for Cory Harrison, becoming the center of attention was a heavy burden. Growing up in the public eye, he had intended to live forever in the shadow of his father's success. While Rick Harrison had built the pawn shop into a thriving business, Cory had to carve out his own identity within the family empire. Television gave him that platform. Pawn Stars allowed him to step out from his father's shadow and into the spotlight, where he could showcase his humor and business acumen. But the fame that helped him build his name also came with the pressure of constant scrutiny and high expectations. Over the years, the pressure to maintain the image of success in the public eye began to take its toll on Cory. Once enjoying the privileges of fame, he now found himself trapped in a web of expectations and obligations. The pressure to uphold the image of a perfect family, a successful business, and a charming television host became overwhelming. As the investigation into the Harrison family's criminal activities deepened, the pressure on Cory grew, amplifying the public's expectations of him. What had been built over years of television appearances now seemed like a distant memory. The person they once knew and admired was no longer himself. As the criminal investigation unfolded, Cory had to face the reality of the situation. He had played a significant role in the downfall of his family's empire, and now there was no escaping the consequences of betrayal and the family's legacy. After Cory's conviction and the public's reaction to the investigation, the Harrison family's legacy was shattered. The empire, built over decades and a symbol of success and entrepreneurial spirit, had now become a cautionary tale. The Harrison family was torn apart by criminal activities that had once lurked beneath the surface, and their reputation would forever be tarnished. The question of what will happen to the family business looms large. For Cory, the weight of betrayal is crushing his father. Rick Harrison built the business from the ground up. For Cory, following in his father's footsteps was a source of pride. But now, Cory is forced to face the reality of his actions. The family that once built a successful empire and reputation is now just a shattered shell of what it once was. Cory's relationship with his father has become strained because of the scandal, and it will never be the same. The man who was once his mentor and role model is now burdened with the broken pieces of the family legacy. The public image of the Harrison family has been destroyed, and there's no turning back. The damage has been done, and no amount of reputation or wealth can repair the devastation caused by Cory's actions. The legacy that was once a symbol of success is now over. The price of fame has proven too steep. The years spent building the family empire were destroyed in an instant, and now Cory must face the harsh reality that everything he once cherished is lost forever. The Harrison family's legacy, from the gold and silver pawn shop to the Pawn Stars show, was once a remarkable success story. But now, the inevitable collapse has shattered everything. What had been built over the years could not be salvaged in the face of Cory's actions. The profits, reputation, and influence they once held are now a painful and difficult memory. Cory lived in the spotlight, but now he's paying the price for every perk fame brought. The years of being adored on reality TV have turned into nothing but shame. The cost has been steep, not just losing wealth and status, but the public's respect and trust. This wreckage is beyond repair, and the Harrison family legacy will forever be tarnished. If you find this story gripping and want to stay updated with the latest, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to catch our